The warm Georgia sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn as the smell of smoky barbecue drifted through the air. In this upscale Atlanta suburb, where pristine houses lined streets dotted with mature oak trees, something special was about to happen. The city's police chief, with 20 years of dedicated service under his belt, was hosting a family gathering to celebrate his daughter's graduation from law school. The chief had called this neighborhood home for 12 years. His Tudor-style house, with its brick exterior and white trim, stood as a testament to years of hard work and dedication. He'd helped build this community, not just as a law enforcement officer, but as a neighbor who always lent a helping hand, whether it was organizing neighborhood watch programs or coaching the local youth basketball team. On this particular Sunday afternoon, the backyard had transformed into a scene of pure joy. The chief stood proudly at his grill, wearing his favorite well-worn apron that his kids had given him years ago for Father's Day. The smell of his secret recipe ribs mingled with the aroma of grilled corn and barbecue chicken, making everyone's mouths water in anticipation. Family members had traveled from across the country for this celebration. His mother, now in her 70s, sat in her favorite portable chair, beaming with pride as she watched her granddaughter, the new law school graduate, showing off her diploma to younger cousins. The chief's wife moved gracefully between guests, making sure everyone had a cold drink and felt welcome, just as she'd done at countless gatherings before. The sound of soft jazz floated through the air from carefully placed speakers, creating the perfect backdrop for the cheerful conversations and occasional bursts of laughter. Children chased each other around the yard, their feet padding softly on the fresh grass, while teenagers gathered around a table laden with chips and homemade dip, sharing stories about their latest adventures. In the corner of the yard, a table displayed family photos chronicling their journey, from his daughter's first day of kindergarten to her law school acceptance letter. Each image told the story of perseverance, love, and family bonds that had grown stronger through the years. The chief occasionally glanced at these photos, his heart swelling with pride at how far they'd come. The atmosphere was perfect, the kind of gathering where time seems to slow down and memories are made. Older relatives shared stories about their own graduations and career beginnings, passing down family wisdom to the younger generation. The graduates sat surrounded by aunts and uncles, soaking in their advice and well wishes for her future legal career. As the chief flipped another rack of ribs, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of 3 generations of his family together, celebrating not just his daughter's achievement, but their collective journey. The neighborhood had always been peaceful, a place where children could play freely and neighbors looked out for each other. Little did he know that this perfect afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test his patience, leadership, and ability to turn a negative situation into a teaching moment for the entire community. The sounds of clinking glasses and shared stories filled the air as the sun continued its lazy descent in the sky. It was the kind of moment that reminded everyone present why family gatherings were so special. A time when the stresses of daily life melted away, replaced by the simple joy of being together. But just as the chief was about to announce that the food was ready, movement from the neighboring house caught his eye, setting in motion a series of events that would soon make headlines across the city. The neighbor's house stood out from the others on the street, not because of its appearance, but because of its newest resident. She had moved in just 2 months ago, bringing with her a cloud of tension that seemed to follow wherever she went. The pristine white exterior of her home matched her carefully maintained appearance, but beneath that polished surface lay something far less welcoming. From day one, she had made her presence known in the neighborhood, though not in the way most new neighbors did. There were no friendly waves, no plates of welcome cookies, no casual conversations over shared fences. Instead, she announced herself through a barrage of complaints to the homeowners association. First, it was about the color of someone's mailbox. Then, about children's bikes left in driveways. Even the height of grass became a point of contention. The neighbor watched the world through her window blinds like a self-appointed guardian of suburban perfection. Her phone was always ready to capture what she deemed violations of neighborhood rules, many of which existed only in her mind. The local homeowners association had received so many emails from her that they'd created a special folder just for her complaints. Other families on the street had tried to welcome her when she first arrived. The couple across the street had brought over a homemade casserole. The retired teacher next door had invited her to join their monthly book club. The family with the golden retriever had suggested afternoon walks together. But she had turned them all away with cold politeness and thinly veiled suspicion. The police chief and his family had made their own attempts at friendship. His wife had dropped by with freshly baked bread, only to have the door closed before she could finish her greeting. Their children had waved cheerfully whenever they saw her, but their friendly gestures were met with blank stares or quickly turned backs. Even their holiday card had been returned unopened. What made her behavior more puzzling was how she seemed to watch certain neighbors more closely than others. When the retired couple hosted their grandchildren, she barely noticed. But when families of color had visitors, her curtains would twitch more frequently, and her security cameras would suddenly adjust their angles. The neighbor's house became a symbol of isolation in a street known for its community spirit. While other homes hosted barbecues, birthday parties, and holiday gatherings, her property remained silent and unwelcoming. The only sounds that ever emerged were the occasional complaints shouted from behind her screen door about parking or noise levels. Some neighbors had theories about her behavior. The retired teacher thought she might be lonely. The family with the golden retriever suggested she might have had bad experiences in her previous neighborhood. The couple across the street wondered if she was dealing with personal problems. But whatever the reason, her presence had created an uncomfortable atmosphere in a place where people once felt completely at ease. As she stood at her window now, watching the police chief's family celebration, her disapproving expression spoke volumes. She paced back and forth, phone in hand, occasionally stopping to take pictures or make notes. The security cameras on her house, which she'd installed within days of moving in, were all pointed toward the chief's backyard, their red lights blinking steadily in the afternoon sun. Little did she know that her next actions would not only disrupt a family celebration, but would also serve as a wake-up call for the entire community. As she reached for her phone with determined purpose, she was about to learn a valuable lesson about assumptions, community, and the consequences of prejudice in a way she never expected. The family celebration was in full swing when the first signs of trouble began to surface. The police chief's daughter had just finished telling a story about her most challenging law school class, drawing laughs from her cousins, when someone noticed movement at the neighbor's property line. The neighbors stood there, phone raised high, seemingly recording every moment of their private gathering. At first, the family tried to ignore it. The chief's wife gently steered conversations away from the unwanted attention, focusing instead on their daughter's accomplishments. An uncle cracked a joke about the delicious smell of barbecue making everyone jealous, trying to lighten the mood. But the neighbor's presence cast an uncomfortable shadow over what should have been a perfect afternoon. The neighbor wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. She paced along the property line, muttering loud enough for nearby guests to hear. This neighborhood used to have standards. Each time she passed by, her comments grew a little louder, a little bolder. Suspicious activity, she said into her phone, though the only activity was a family enjoying their Sunday afternoon. The youngest children, who had been playing tag in the yard, slowly gravitated toward the adults, sensing the tension in the air. The chief's mother, wise from years of dealing with similar situations, gathered them close and started telling stories about their family history, keeping their attention away from the unpleasant scene unfolding at the edge of the property. The teenagers at the party exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen this kind of behavior before, though never so blatant. One of them had already pulled out their phone, ready to document any escalation. The chief's daughter, fresh from her law school graduation, watched with a mix of sadness and determination, seeing firsthand why she'd chosen to pursue a career in civil rights law. Despite the neighbors' attempts to dampen their spirits, the family refused to let her succeed. The music continued to play softly. The grill continued to send mouth-watering aromas through the air. Conversations carried on, though now in slightly lower voices. They had worked too hard and come too far to let one person's prejudice ruin their celebration. The chief himself maintained his composure, though anyone who knew him well could see the slight tension in his shoulders as he tended to the grill. Years of law enforcement experience had taught him the importance of staying calm in tense situations. He kept a watchful eye on the situation while ensuring his famous ribs didn't burn, a skill only a seasoned father and officer could perfect. Some of the guests started sharing their own stories in hushed tones. Similar experiences they'd faced in their own neighborhoods, at work, or while shopping. Each story strengthened their resolve not to let this incident overshadow their celebration. If anything, it reminded them why gatherings like this were so important. They were not just celebrations, but statements of resilience and dignity. The neighbor's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She was now taking photos of license plates from cars parked legally on the street. Her voice carried across the yard as she spoke into her phone. "They're obviously not from around here. This must be some kind of unauthorized gathering." The absurdity of her statements would have been almost funny if it weren't so concerning. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, nobody in the family gathering could have predicted how the next few moments would unfold. The neighbor's face showed grim determination as she made one final call, a decision that would backfire in ways she never could have imagined. The neighbor's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed 911, her face set with determination. The emergency dispatcher's voice came through clearly. 911. What's your emergency? The neighbor began her carefully crafted complaint, her voice dripping with fake concern as she paced behind her property line. Yes, hello. I need to report suspicious activity, she began, keeping her voice just loud enough for nearby party guests to hear. There's a large group of people gathering at the house next door. I don't recognize any of them, and I'm concerned about the safety of our neighborhood. She emphasized the word people in a way that made her real meaning crystal clear to everyone within earshot. The dispatcher maintained their professional tone, asking for more details. The neighbor grew more animated, her free hand gesturing wildly as she spoke. They've been here for hours, playing music and cooking outdoors. There must be at least 20 of them. This is a quiet neighborhood, you know. We have standards here. As she continued her call, she listed off a series of completely normal activities as if they were serious crimes. They're grilling food, she reported, as if operating a barbecue was somehow suspicious. Children are running around in the yard, she added, making innocent play sound like a disturbance of the peace. And there are multiple vehicles parked on the street, she emphasized, though every car was legally parked. The dispatcher asked if there was any actual disturbance or illegal activity occurring. The neighbor paused, clearly frustrated that her implications weren't being immediately acted upon. Well, no. But these people clearly don't belong here. This is an upscale neighborhood. How do we know they're not casing our houses? Something needs to be done. In the backyard, the family had fallen into an uneasy quiet. The older relatives had seen this scenario play out before in their lifetimes, while the younger ones were witnessing firsthand what their parents and grandparents had told them about. The chief's wife quietly began gathering the children closer to the house, her protective instincts kicking in despite knowing they were perfectly within their rights. The neighbor's voice grew louder as she became more frustrated with the dispatcher's professional but neutral responses. Look, I pay a lot in property taxes to live in a safe neighborhood. These people are bringing down our property values just by being here. I demand that someone come check this out immediately. She began quoting ordinances about noise levels and public gatherings, though none of them actually applied to a family barbecue on private property. Her voice took on a shrill quality as she realized she wasn't getting the response she wanted. I know my rights as a homeowner, and I have the right to feel safe in my own neighborhood. The police chief, still standing at his grill, could hear every word of her conversation. Years of experience had taught him exactly how these situations typically played out. He continued cooking, his calm exterior masking the sadness he felt, not for himself, but for how this moment was affecting his family, especially the younger ones who were witnessing such blatant prejudice firsthand. Finally, the neighbor played what she thought was her trump card. "Listen," she said into the phone, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper, though it carried clearly across the yard. "I've been recording everything. I have proof of their suspicious behavior. I need officers here now. And please send someone." She paused for effect. "Who will take this situation seriously?" Little did she know that her call would set in motion events that would lead to a very different outcome than she expected. As she ended the call with a satisfied smirk, the sound of approaching sirens in the distance marked the beginning of what would become a memorable lesson in assumptions and consequences. The familiar sound of approaching police sirens cut through the afternoon air. 2 patrol cars pulled up smoothly to the curb, their lights flashing but sirens now silent. The neighbor straightened her posture and smoothed her clothes, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she hurried down her driveway to meet them. Inside the backyard, the family remained calm. The police chief continued tending to his grill, adjusting the heat under a rack of perfectly cooked ribs. His wife stood nearby, her hand resting gently on their daughter's shoulder. The new law school graduate watched the scene unfold with professional interest, already mentally documenting every detail. The first officer stepped out of his car, and his eyes immediately widened in recognition. The second officer, emerging from the other patrol car, had a similar reaction. Both of them had worked directly under the chief for years. The younger officer had even attended the department's family picnic in this very backyard just last summer. They approached with measured steps, maintaining their professional demeanor despite the awkward situation. The neighbor rushed forward, speaking before they could even properly exit their vehicles. "Thank goodness you're here. They're right back there." She gestured dramatically toward the backyard. "I have videos and photos of everything." The first officer tried to interrupt her tirade. "Ma'am, I need to inform you." But she continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "There must be 20 of them back there, playing music, cooking food, children running everywhere. In our neighborhood. Can you imagine? I've been watching them all afternoon, and I just knew something had to be done." The second officer cleared his throat, trying again to speak, but the neighbor was on a roll. "I've documented everything," she said, waving her phone. The cars parked on the street, the people coming and going, the smoke from their grill. "This is a respectable neighborhood, and we simply can't have this kind of activity here." Finally, the first officer managed to speak. "Ma'am, are you aware who lives in that house?" The neighbor paused mid-sentence, caught off guard by the question. "That's not relevant," she insisted. "These people clearly don't belong here." The officers exchanged glances, years of professional training barely masking their discomfort with the situation. Just then, the police chief stepped into view, still wearing his kiss the cook apron, spatula in hand. "Everything okay out here, officers?" he called out, his voice carrying the natural authority that had earned him respect throughout the department. The neighbor turned, her face changing from righteous indignation to confusion as she watched both officers snap to attention. "Chief," the younger officer called out respectfully. "Sorry to interrupt your family gathering, sir. We received a call about—" He trailed off, glancing uncertainly at the neighbor. The color drained from the neighbor's face as realization dawned. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The phone in her hand, so recently used to document her complaints, now hung limply at her side. The security cameras she'd been so proud of had captured every moment of her own embarrassment. The afternoon sun caught the chief's badge, which hung on display near the grill, sending a bright reflection across the yard. The neighbor's eyes fixed on it, then darted between the officer's respectful expressions and the chief's calm demeanor. Her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling around her, and the true nature of her actions was becoming painfully clear. The revelation hit the neighbor like a bucket of cold water. She stood frozen on her perfectly manicured lawn, her mouth slightly open, as 20 years of law enforcement experience walked towards her, spatula still in hand. The police chief's calm demeanor somehow made the situation even more uncomfortable for her. The two officers tried to maintain their professional composure, but anyone could see they were struggling not to react to the absurdity of the situation. The younger officer kept looking between his chief and the neighbor, while his partner suddenly became very interested in writing something in his notepad. From the backyard, family members had gathered near the fence to watch the scene unfold. The chief's daughter, the newly graduated lawyer, stood with her arms crossed, taking mental notes for what would surely become a story she'd tell in future civil rights lectures. The younger children whispered among themselves, not fully understanding the situation but aware that something important was happening. "I believe we haven't properly met," the chief said, his voice carrying the same steady tone he used in community meetings. "I'm the police chief of this city, and this is my home. I've lived here for 12 years. He paused, letting that information sink in. "Those suspicious people you're concerned about, that's my family celebrating my daughter's law school graduation." The neighbor's face cycled through several emotions: shock, embarrassment, disbelief, and finally, a dawning horror as she realized the full implications of her actions. The phone in her hand, which she'd been using to record everything, now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I didn't," she stammered, her previous confidence evaporating like morning dew. The carefully constructed speech she'd prepared about neighborhood standards and property values died in her throat. The security cameras she'd installed, which were still recording everything, were now documenting her own mortification. The chief's wife had joined him now, standing beside her husband with quiet dignity. The contrast between her graceful presence and the neighbor's flustered state couldn't have been more striking. Even now, there was no anger in their expressions, only a calm certainty that spoke of years of dealing with similar situations. "You know," the chief continued, his voice still measured and professional, "we have some extra food. Would you like to join us? Meet the family you've been so concerned about." It was an olive branch, offered with genuine sincerity despite everything that had happened. The kind of gesture that spoke volumes about his character and leadership style. The younger officer couldn't help but smile slightly. He'd seen his chief diffuse countless tense situations over the years, but this one would definitely be going into the training manual. The neighbor, meanwhile, seemed to be shrinking into herself, her earlier bravado replaced by the uncomfortable realization that she'd just called the police on her neighbor, the city's police chief, at his own family barbecue. Several of the teenagers in the backyard had their phones out, though the adults had quietly suggested they put them away. This wasn't about humiliation or revenge, it was about something more important. It was about showing the younger generation how to handle prejudice with dignity and turn ignorance into an opportunity for growth. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, the neighbors stood at a crossroads. The chief's invitation hung in the air, offering a chance for redemption, learning, and community. Her response in the next few moments would reveal not just her character, but her capacity for growth and change. The backyard fell silent as the police chief took a step closer to his neighbor. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the scene, highlighting the contrast between his welcoming stance and her rigid posture. His invitation to join the celebration still hung in the air, heavy with meaning and possibility. "Let me introduce myself properly," the chief began, his voice carrying the same warmth he used when speaking at community outreach events. "I've been the police chief of this city for 8 years now. Before that, I was a detective, and before that, a patrol officer, just like these two fine officers here." He gestured to his colleagues, who stood at a respectful distance. The neighbor's eyes darted between the chief, the officers, and the family gathering behind them. Her fingers nervously played with the phone that had so recently been her weapon of choice. The security cameras she'd installed continued their silent vigil, recording a moment she'd probably rather forget. "You know," the chief continued, removing his cooking apron, "I've found that most misunderstandings in our community come from people not knowing their neighbors." He spoke with the wisdom of someone who'd seen both the best and worst of human nature throughout his career. When we stay behind our walls and make assumptions, we miss out on the chance to build real connections. The chief's wife stepped forward, still holding a plate of freshly grilled corn. "We've tried to welcome you to the neighborhood several times," she said gently. "The bread I brought over last month. That was my grandmother's recipe." Her words carried no accusation, only a hint of sadness at opportunities lost. The gathered family members watched with various expressions. The older ones had seen such scenes play out before, while the younger ones were witnessing a masterclass in handling prejudice with grace. The chief's daughter, fresh from law school, observed how her father was turning this moment into a teaching opportunity. "Our community is strong because of its diversity," the chief continued, gesturing toward his family. "That's my mother over there. She was one of the first black teachers in this county. My daughter just graduated law school. She'll be working in civil rights law. My brother-in-law runs a successful business downtown." Each statement challenged the assumptions the neighbor had made. The two officers exchanged glances, knowing they were watching something important unfold. This wasn't just about one afternoon's incident. It was about breaking down barriers that had existed far too long. Their chief was handling this situation not with anger or retribution, but with an invitation to learn and grow. The neighbor shifted her weight from foot to foot, her earlier righteousness replaced by visible discomfort. The phone in her hand, the same one she'd used to call 911, now seemed to weigh heavily. The chief's calm words were doing what no amount of confrontation could have achieved. They were making her think. "So," the chief said, extending his hand, "would you like to start over? We have plenty of food, and my wife's potato salad has won awards at the department picnic." His gesture was more than just an invitation to a barbecue. It was an opportunity for change, a chance to bridge the gap she created with her assumptions and fear. The tension in the air was thick as everyone waited for her response. This moment would define not just the rest of the afternoon, but the future of neighborhood relations. The chief had opened the door, but it was up to her to walk through it. The neighbor took 2 steps backward, her face flushed with embarrassment. I need to go," she stammered, turning quickly and practically running back to her house. The sound of her front door slamming echoed through the neighborhood, leaving behind a mix of emotions in the gathering dusk. Within hours, the story began spreading through local social media groups. Someone had captured parts of the incident on their phone, though the family requested it not be shared publicly. Instead, the video made its way to the city council and community leaders, sparking important conversations about neighborhood relations and racial profiling. The next morning, local news vans parked along the street. Reporters tried to get comments from the neighbor, but her curtains remained tightly drawn. Her security cameras, which had been so active during the barbecue, were now oddly still. The only sign of life was the occasional flicker of movement behind the blinds. The police chief's phone didn't stop ringing. Community leaders, fellow officers, and concerned citizens all wanted to know how he was handling the situation. His response remained consistent. "This is an opportunity for our community to grow stronger, not divide further." His words, spoken with genuine conviction, became the headline in the evening news. At the police department, officers gathered in the break room, discussing the incident in hushed tones. The 2 officers who had responded to the call became reluctant celebrities, their body camera footage becoming an instant teaching tool for handling delicate community situations. The younger officer couldn't help but smile when recalling the chief's calm demeanor while wearing his cooking apron. The neighborhood itself was buzzing with activity. Families who had never spoken before found themselves in lengthy conversations on their front lawns. The retired teacher organized an impromptu community meeting in her garden. The family with the golden retriever started planning a neighborhood potluck. It seemed the incident had awakened something in the community, a desire to ensure this never happened again. The chief's daughter, seeing an opportunity to make a difference, started drafting a proposal for community engagement programs. Her law school training, combined with her personal experience, gave her unique insights into how communities could bridge cultural divides. Several of her professors reached out, asking her to speak to their classes about the incident. Social media exploded with discussions. The hashtag BBQ while black started trending locally, but instead of fueling anger, it became a catalyst for sharing stories of community healing and understanding. People began posting photos of multicultural neighborhood gatherings, inspired by the chief's graceful handling of the situation. Local businesses stepped up, with one restaurant owner offering to cater a community unity dinner. The neighborhood association, which had received countless complaints from the neighbor, now found itself organizing diversity and inclusion workshops. Even the mayor called, expressing both concern and pride in how the situation was handled. The incident sparked uncomfortable but necessary conversations in homes across the city. Parents used it as a teaching moment, explaining to their children about prejudice and the importance of treating everyone with respect. Schools requested the chief speak at assemblies about community relations and the power of responding to bias with dignity. By week's end, the story had transformed from a potential crisis into a powerful lesson about community, leadership, and the possibility of change. The neighbor's house remained quiet, her absence speaking volumes about the weight of her actions. But around her, the neighborhood was changing, growing, and coming together in ways no one had expected. In the weeks that followed, the police chief turned this incident into something much bigger than a single afternoon's confrontation. At the department's next training session, he stood before his officers, no longer in his BBQ apron, but in his formal uniform, sharing lessons that went far beyond standard protocol. Sometimes, he told his officers, our biggest impact comes not from what we enforce, but from how we bring people together. The training room was packed, with officers from neighboring districts requesting to attend. The two officers who had responded to the call that day sat in the front row, their experience now part of the department's teaching curriculum. The chief implemented new community outreach programs, starting with coffee with a cop sessions in different neighborhoods. These weren't just about police work. They were about breaking down barriers, sharing stories, and building real connections. The turnout surprised everyone, with residents from all backgrounds coming together over simple cups of coffee. Meanwhile, the neighbor's house went up for sale quietly one morning. The for sale sign appeared without fanfare, and moving trucks came and went in the early hours when most neighbors were still asleep. She left without saying goodbye, but her departure marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another for the community. The chief's daughter's graduation celebration, interrupted by prejudice, became the catalyst for an annual neighborhood unity cookout. The first one drew hundreds of people from across the city. The aroma of different cultural dishes filled the air as families shared not just food, but stories, laughter, and the simple joy of being together. Local schools adopted new programs focusing on community relations and understanding. The chief became a regular speaker, but he always brought others with him, community leaders, activists, and everyday citizens who had stories to share. The students learned not just from his words, but from the example he had set that summer afternoon. The incident made its way into police training manuals across the country, not as an example of what went wrong, but as a masterclass in how to turn a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for growth. The chief received invitations to speak at law enforcement conferences, sharing his experience and vision for community-centered policing. The security cameras that had once been used to surveil neighbors were replaced by welcome signs and flower boxes by the new family that moved in. Children played freely in front yards again, and the sound of laughter replaced the tension that had once filled the air. The neighborhood had not just recovered, it had transformed. 1 year later, At another family barbecue, the chief stood at his grill again. This time, the yard was filled with not just family, but neighbors from every house on the street. His daughter, now a practicing civil rights lawyer, had helped draft community guidelines that were being adopted by neighborhoods across the city. As the sun set on another perfect barbecue day, the chief looked around at what his community had become. Children of all backgrounds played together while their parents chatted and shared dishes. The incident that could have divided them had instead brought them closer, proving that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. The aroma of grilled food still filled the air, but now it was mixed with the scent of dishes from around the world. Music from different cultures played softly, and the laughter of children echoed through the yards. The neighborhood had found its way to a better place, not despite what happened, but because of how they chose to respond to it.